her parents reported her missing. It was right around 6:30 p.m.
110 Ben Hill Road off of Beach Creek should be the first residence on your right. Reference to a missing 4-year-old. The parents have called in, advised that the mother had went for a walk, came home, now they can't find her. They've been yelling for her. She's been gone for about 10 minutes now.
On June 15th, 2021, 5-year-old Summer Wells disappeared from her home in Beach Creek, Tennessee. One moment she was playing near the house. Minutes later, she was gone. 4 years have passed, and not a single trace of her has ever been found. No body, no suspect, no explanation. What shocked many wasn't just her disappearance, but how quickly the case went cold. The timeline from her family never quite fit. Statements changed. Search dogs lost her scent just a few steps from the basement. This isn't just a missing child case, it's a story full of shadows. Too many questions, too few answers. Was this a moment of panic turned secret? 5 theories have emerged, each shaped by strange details, contradictions, and the silence of those involved. And if the truth was hidden by those closest to her, then what or who can we trust? Before we begin, we need to go back to the house on Ben Hill Road, to the people who lived there, and to the day everything changed. Understanding what happened to Summer Wells starts not with wild theories, but with the world she came from, who she was, where she lived, and what was said in those first crucial hours. Summer Moon, Utah Wells was born in 2016 in Rogersville, Tennessee. At the time of her disappearance, she was 5 years old. Small, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and known for being playful, fearless, and full of energy. Summer lived in a remote, rural home on Ben Hill Road in the Beach Creek community with her father Don Wells, her mother Candace Bly, her 3 older brothers, and her maternal grandmother Candace's. The house was surrounded by dense woods and sat atop a hill, accessible only through a steep, narrow road. It was isolated, no visible neighbors, limited cell reception, and no security cameras. The Wells family kept to themselves, and the children were homeschooled. Dawn worked construction while Candace stayed home with the kids. On June 15, 2021, around 6:30 p.m., a 911 call was made by Candace, reporting that her daughter was missing. According to her version, Summer had been outside helping her grandmother plant flowers. Candace left Summer for just 2 minutes to check on the boys inside. When she returned, Summer was gone. The response was swift. Local police, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and multiple volunteer search teams flooded the area. Within 24 hours, Summer's photo was shared across media and digital billboards. The terrain was difficult: thick forest, uneven ground, and wild animals. Over the course of days, search crews scoured over 5,000 acres using helicopters, K-9 units, thermal drones, and dive teams in nearby bodies of water. Despite the massive effort, no trace of Summer was ever found. Not a single item of clothing, not a footprint, not even a scent trail beyond the basement area. Cadaver dogs reportedly picked up her scent near the basement door, but it stopped abruptly, with no indication she walked into the woods or was carried down the driveway. TBI held multiple press conferences urging the public not to spread rumors. They confirmed that everyone, including the parents, was under investigation, and that no theory had been ruled out. The case was labeled outside the norm, hinting at its complexity. Public suspicion began to grow as interviews with the parents surfaced. Don Wells appeared on news segments and YouTube channels, often shifting his tone from grieving father to defensive, even erratic at times. His criminal record, including prior arrests for domestic violence and substance abuse, resurfaced online. Candace Bly, on the other hand, remained mostly silent in the early weeks, later granting interviews that contradicted earlier statements. The timeline provided by the family raised eyebrows. At one point, Candace claimed she was also doing laundry and dealing with groceries. Then, she added that she had been watching YouTube with Summer before she disappeared. These inconsistencies led many to believe that the story was being reshaped over time. The 3 older brothers were reportedly inside the house watching TV when Summer vanished. Authorities stated early on that the children were interviewed, but details of those conversations were never made public. Grandmother Candace's, who was present that day, also gave her own account, slightly different from Candace's. She mentioned that Summer had gone into the house to play, and that Candace had gone to check on her a short while later. The timing, exact movements, and who saw what, remained unclear. In the weeks following the disappearance, the Wells family was the focus of intense online speculation. Social media became a battleground of theories, accusations, and amateur investigations. Some called it a tragic case of neglect. Others believed foul play was involved. A few clung to hope that Summer had been kidnapped and was still alive. Despite the chaos, official investigators remained tight-lipped. They repeatedly emphasized that they needed credible tips, not online noise. By late 2021, reward money for information topped $7,000. Hundreds of tips came in, but none led to a breakthrough. To understand this case, we must examine 5 key theories that emerged, each shaped by specific evidence, contradictions, and the people closest to Summer. Was it an accident that turned into a cover-up? A kidnapping gone wrong? Or something more complicated hiding behind closed doors? This is where the story deepens, and where the search for truth begins. The emotional landscape of the Wells family, after Summer's disappearance, was as complex as the facts surrounding the case. Don Wells often presented himself as a man of faith, saying he believed God would bring Summer home. But in several public interviews, he alternated between hope and despair, calm and agitation. Some viewers found his behavior troubling, not because of overt guilt, but because of how disjointed his emotional responses appeared. At times, he pleaded for the public's help. Other times, he lashed out at critics, accusing them of attacking his family without evidence. Candace Bly, in contrast, withdrew from the spotlight early on. Her silence raised suspicion in some circles, but others interpreted it as trauma. When she did speak, her interviews lacked clarity. She struggled with timelines, repeated phrases without much detail, and appeared emotionally detached. Some experts suggested that this could be a coping mechanism, common in mothers facing unimaginable stress. Others, however, saw it as avoidance. Grandmother Candace's speaking rarely and mostly through second-hand reports. Her role in the hours surrounding Summer's disappearance has been under-discussed, but not forgotten. Her presence at the scene makes her a key witness. Yet her account has remained largely in the background. Each adult in the house that day has processed the loss differently, but none have escaped public scrutiny. The lack of coordinated messaging, combined with previous legal issues and ongoing inconsistencies, has made it difficult for the public and investigators to fully trust the narrative. Yet it's important to remember, grief is not linear. Not everyone cries on camera. Not everyone reacts the way we expect. But when every version of the story feels fractured, the line between trauma and deception grows thinner. And that's why we look deeper. Among the many theories surrounding the disappearance of Summer Wells, one of the most enduring is also the most tragic, that she died accidentally, and those closest to her chose to hide the truth. This theory does not involve strangers or criminal masterminds. It centers on panic, guilt, and the instinct to protect oneself, even at the cost of justice. Let's begin with the clashing accounts between Candace Bly, Summer's mother, and Hunter, a 15-year-old boy who spent time with the family on the day Summer vanished. Candace claimed the day was uneventful. She picked up Hunter, went to a local swimming hole with Summer and her grandmother, bought groceries, and returned home. But Hunter's story contradicts this. He said Summer went underwater and had to be pulled out. He described Candace allegedly drinking twisted teas and vaping. This contradiction isn't just a matter of memory. It's about intent and risk. If Summer inhaled water or struck her head, symptoms might not show until later. Dry drowning, fatigue, induced collapse, or head trauma could explain a delayed medical emergency. If Summer was lethargic, dazed, or unconscious on the way home, Candace may have already sensed something was wrong. Then came the now infamous video posted by Candace to TikTok. It shows Summer lying in the back seat of the car, resting against 2 milk jugs. Her head is tilted. Her eyes are closed. Her posture appears limp. To some, she's simply sleeping. To others, the scene is chilling. Her body shows no signs of typical childlike restlessness. Her limbs hang heavily. Her expression is frozen. Was this just a nap, or a fatal moment captured on camera? If Summer had already died or was unresponsive, this video could have served as a calculated timestamp, proof that she was okay. During the ride home, some theorize the video was posted to anchor the timeline around a certain hour, providing digital evidence that could support Candace's version of events. That's not something a grieving parent would typically consider, but it is something a frightened one might. The next critical detail is Candace's claim that she left Summer with her grandmother and went inside the house for 2 minutes. When she returned, Summer was gone. This version of events has been repeated countless times. But is it plausible? 2 minutes is an incredibly short window for a child to vanish without a sound. No screams, no sightings, no clues. 2-minute story raises more questions than answers. If Summer had wandered off, dogs would likely have tracked her scent. If she had been abducted, someone would have had to arrive silently, take her without resistance, and leave no trace, all in under 120 seconds. More reasonably, some believe this 2-minute frame was created to structure the cover story, not to describe an actual disappearance. Adding to the suspicion is the dog scent evidence. Search dogs picked up Summer's scent near the basement door, then nothing. No trail into the woods. No scent on the road. The scent stops abruptly, which suggests two things. Either she was taken in a vehicle directly from that location, or she never left the house alive. Both possibilities cast doubt on the story told by Candace and Dawn. Then there is the question of behavior. In the days after Summer disappeared, the family appeared on camera. Dawn was emotional but inconsistent. He invoked religion, offered changing timelines, and made accusations about outsiders. Candace, by contrast, was notably subdued. In early videos, she stood off to the side, arms folded, avoiding eye contact. She rarely spoke. When she did, her tone was flat. Critics pointed out that she didn't exhibit what most would call a normal reaction. No visible panic, no urgency, no desperate calls for help. Some suggested this was simply her personality. Others argued it was shock. But criminal psychologists note that individuals who are hiding something often exhibit controlled, muted behavior. Not because they're cold, but because they are managing a script. This brings us to a deeper level of analysis, the online investigations. On Reddit and YouTube, thousands of users have spent years dissecting every element of the story. One popular theory begins with a reconstructed timeline. If Summer was last seen around 2 p.m., but the TikTok video wasn't posted until 3:30 p.m., and the 911 call wasn't made until after 6 p.m., what happened in those missing hours? Users have pointed out inconsistencies between Dawn's and Candace's accounts. One example, Dawn initially claimed he was at work during the disappearance, but later admitted he returned home around the time police arrived. Candace said she was doing laundry when Summer disappeared, then later said she was helping Grandma plant flowers. These changes seem small, but when the story is supposed to revolve around a 2-minute window, even minor shifts carry weight. Some Reddit sleuths have gone further, proposing detailed psychological profiles of the parents. In one thread, users debated whether Candace exhibited signs of trauma bonding, codependency, or physical survival instincts. Others analyzed Dawn's phrasing, noting that he often mentioned Summer, even before her condition was confirmed. One user argued that this showed pre-mortification guilt, a subconscious acknowledgement of what he already knew. The dog's behavior has also been analyzed in depth. Trained cadaver dogs did not find a body. Tracking dogs lost the scent quickly. But some handlers say this is common in staged scenes, especially if the scent was manipulated or masked. For example, if Summer's body had been placed briefly in the basement, then moved using a sealed container or vehicle, the trail could have stopped precisely where it did. Another major theme on Reddit is the video of Summer in the car. Many users noted that the back seat appeared unusually clean. The milk jugs were full, suggesting a grocery run. But Summer's clothing didn't match earlier descriptions. One user posted a side-by-side image showing her hair dry despite just leaving the swimming hole. That raised a disturbing possibility. The video wasn't taken that day, but earlier, and was posted to confuse the timeline. That idea feeds into the larger belief that the cover-up began long before the 911 call. If Summer had died at the waterhole, or on the drive home, Candace and Grandma may have returned to the house and coordinated a story, planting flowers, narrative, the 2 minutes, disappearance, a few pictures, a short video, then the call, all carefully staged. It's worth noting that the three brothers were home that day. Their accounts have never been made public. Law enforcement has said little about their statements. But if Summer disappeared within feet of them, why didn't they hear or see anything? Were they asleep, watching TV, or told not to speak? Online communities have speculated that the children may have been coached or kept in separate rooms during interviews. Grandmother Candace's role is also opaque. Despite being a key witness, she has rarely spoken. Her version of the events, if officially recorded, has never been released. Some suggest she knows more than she has said. Others believe she's simply trying to protect her daughter. Either way, her silence adds another layer of opacity to a case already drowning in ambiguity. In the end, this theory doesn't claim to know exactly what happened. It doesn't point a finger with certainty, but it offers a framework that explains why no one saw anything, why the trail ends at the house, why the family's stories never align, and why, after all this time, we still have no answers. If the truth was buried in panic, shame, or fear, then the search outside will never matter. Because the real story ended before the police even arrived. One telling moment comes from a brief clip in which Candace says, "I don't know what happened." Her tone is flat. Her eyes wander. There is no visible anguish. For a mother whose daughter has vanished without a trace, this kind of emotional void is jarring. Could it be that Candace was emotionally exhausted? Or was she emotionally distant because she already knew what had happened and was trying not to let it show? Don Wells, on the other hand, has been more vocal, but not necessarily more helpful. He has changed his story multiple times, contradicted Candace in public interviews, and offered theories ranging from abduction to religious prophecy. At one point, he suggested that Summer had been taken because she was a gift from God. These kinds of statements have raised concerns among professionals and amateurs alike. Was Don simply grasping for meaning? Or was he trying to muddy the waters by throwing out multiple? His public behavior has also been erratic. He was arrested for DUI months after Summer's disappearance. He called into YouTube live streams late at night, often sounding confused or intoxicated. He accused neighbors, law enforcement, and even his own family members. In doing so, Don may have hoped to deflect suspicion, casting the net so wide that no single story could be pinned down. But paradoxically, this behavior made him appear more guilty to many observers. Together, Candace and Don present a complicated picture. It's this blend of chaos and silence, of conflicting stories and muted grief, that has kept the theory of accidental death and concealment alive in the public imagination. From the very first night, Don and Candace Wells insisted that Summer had been abducted. In their words, a stranger came onto their isolated property in Beach Creek, Tennessee, took their daughter, and vanished, without leaving a trace. This claim formed the basis of the second major theory, that Summer Wells was kidnapped, possibly for the purpose of human trafficking. One of the central pieces of this theory is the report of a red Toyota Tacoma seen in the area. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issued a be on the lookout for a 1998 to 2000 model with ladder racks and white buckets in the bed. It was reportedly spotted near Ben Hill Road around the time Summer vanished. But here's the problem. Law enforcement never located the vehicle, nor identified its driver. This open thread continues to haunt the investigation. The layout of the Wells home has also fueled speculation. Summer's bedroom was located in the basement, accessible by a side door that opens to a small patch of land shielded by trees. This entrance is out of sight from the main road, and even from most angles of the house. If someone knew the property, they could have slipped in, taken Summer, and left, especially if she had already been asleep. Critics of this theory argue that there was no sound, no sign of a struggle, no barking from the family dogs. But defenders counter that if the abductor was quiet, quick, and possibly familiar to Summer, she might not have screamed. If she had been drugged, there wouldn't have been a struggle at all. Still, the absence of a ransom demand is troubling. Most abductions for extortion involve communication, yet in Summer's case, there was silence, no demands, no leads, just a void. That led some theorists to suggest an even darker possibility: trafficking. Human trafficking rings have operated in Tennessee before. Between 2011 and 2015, the state saw a rise in trafficking cases along rural routes. Children, especially those from vulnerable or isolated families, were targeted. Some Reddit researchers compared Summer's case to those of Inga Jarek in Germany and Haley Cummings in Florida, both young girls who vanished under strange circumstances, with no remains ever found. In both cases, trafficking was considered a possible motive. So what if Summer was taken as part of a premeditated operation? The red truck, the secluded house, the brief window of time, it all fits the profile of a calculated snatch. One theory suggests that someone watched the Wells family for days, learned their habits, and waited for the perfect moment. Of course, there are challenges to this theory. Why would a trafficker risk exposure in a remote area without backup or certainty that Summer would be alone? And if this was a sophisticated operation, why choose such an unpredictable location? The risk-reward ratio seems unbalanced. And yet, the family's insistence on abduction, combined with the physical layout of the house and the disappearance timeline, has kept this theory alive. Candace and Dawn both appeared on national television, begging for her return, asking the public to look for predator. Some saw this as desperation. Others saw it as deflection. Is it possible that someone really did enter the property that night, and that the family is telling the truth? Or is the abduction theory just a smokescreen for something more domestic and tragic? Let's break down the components of this theory in detail. Let's begin by examining the red Toyota Tacoma in more detail. This vehicle became a focal point in the days following Summer's disappearance. The fact that it has never been found or accounted for continues to fuel the belief that it may have been involved. Despite statewide alerts and national media coverage, no one ever came forward to say, "That was my truck." In most cases, innocent owners eventually identify themselves, either through tips or media pressure. Next, let's examine the feasibility of someone entering through the basement. The Wells home, though remote, was known to some locals. It is not implausible that someone in the community knew the layout of the house. The basement door, which reportedly had no security cameras or strong locks, was an easy point of entry. If Summer was napping or playing downstairs, an intruder could have slipped in without being seen from the upper floors or the road. The element of surprise would have been complete. Then there is the issue of the dogs. Many skeptics argue that the family's dogs, said to be loud and territorial, would have barked if a stranger came near. But that's not always true. Dogs sometimes don't bark at people they know. If the abductor was familiar to the family, the dogs might not have reacted. Alternatively, if Summer was removed in complete silence, the dogs may not have detected anything until it was too late. Could Summer have been drugged and taken without resistance? This is a disturbing, but not impossible idea. Traffickers have been known to use fast, acting sedatives. In a case from Florida, a child was removed from a bedroom window while under the influence of Benadryl, used in high. The time window of 2 minutes seems tight, but if Summer was already incapacitated or even asleep, and if the abductor moved quickly, it could have been enough. In Summer's case, the same pattern has emerged: no demands, no sightings, no evidence. This void creates space for trafficking theories to grow. Online forums have pointed to unsolved abduction rings and alleged connections to known offenders in nearby counties. Some even speculate that Summer may have been taken and moved across state lines before police were ever called. But this theory also faces challenges. For example, there were no confirmed sightings of suspicious individuals in the area, no camera footage, no tire tracks, no physical signs of a break-in. And yet, that's what makes it so chilling. If this was a professional operation, that's exactly what you would expect, no trace. Finally, there's the family's insistence that abduction is the only explanation. From day one, both Candace and Dawn have rejected any theory involving an accident or internal wrongdoing. This unwavering position, repeated in dozens of interviews, has led many to wonder, are they simply clinging to hope? Or are they trying to sell a version of events that protects them? Ultimately, the abduction and trafficking theory remains one of the most debated. It's supported by the red truck, the layout of the home, and the disappearance without a trace. But it lacks physical evidence, relies heavily on hypotheticals, and competes with more domestic explanations. Still, in the haunting quiet that surrounds Summer's case, this theory refuses to die. Until more evidence comes to light, every possibility remains on the table. When we consider the possibility that Summer Wells may have vanished not due to outside interference, but because of something more deeply rooted within the family home, the third theory arises with disturbing clarity. This theory suggests that Summer was the victim of ongoing domestic abuse, possibly escalating into fatal injury, and that the circumstances of her disappearance may have been deliberately obscured to protect someone within the household. To begin with, Don Wells' history cannot be ignored. His criminal background includes multiple arrests for domestic violence, use of stimulants, and driving under the influence. Public records, as well as his own statements, show a pattern of aggression, instability, and addictive behavior. Don has also admitted to spending time in prison and to having a violent past. In interviews, he often contradicts himself or behaves erratically, sometimes showing anger, sometimes appearing numb. To some observers, this isn't simply the disorientation of grief, it's the behavior of a man whose emotional state has long been volatile. Candace Bly, Summer's mother, once filed for a protection order against Don. In that document, she claimed Don had threatened her and the children with a firearm. Specifically, it was alleged that Don brandished a gun during a domestic dispute, with children present. Though the order was withdrawn shortly afterward, this pattern aligns with what many experts see in cycles of abuse, a moment of fear, followed by silence, forgiveness, or pressure to drop the case. Whether out of love, fear, or financial dependence, many victims stay. Shortly after Summer's disappearance, Child Protective Services removed her 3 brothers from the home. While no official reason was made public, it was a telling move. CPS does not take children lightly. Something they observed, heard, or suspected must have raised significant concern. It could have been the home environment, the interviews with the children, or new evidence from the ongoing investigation. But the message was clear: this was not a safe place. There are also online discussions and rumors, especially from Reddit and YouTube users, that suggest Summer may have been the victim of physical injury prior to her disappearance. These theories are speculative but point to behavioral red flags: the parents' lack of coordinated statements, their sometimes flat or oddly timed emotional responses, and the family's history of trauma. Some posts claim that Summer had bruises in previous photos, or appeared withdrawn in later videos. While such claims are difficult to verify, they reflect a growing unease within the online community about the family dynamic. A particularly grim possibility that some have proposed is that Summer was harmed following an argument, accident, or episode of abuse. Not necessarily premeditated murder, but a moment of rage or poor judgment that led to tragedy. In this version, the panic afterward led to a cover-up. The decision to fabricate a disappearance story may have stemmed from fear, not just of criminal charges, but of losing custody of the remaining children or facing public shame. Why wouldn't someone speak out? If Summer died in the home due to abuse, surely someone would crack. That's where the psychological control dynamics come into play. Don's dominance in the household has been observed in many of his interviews. He speaks over Candace, guides the narrative, and presents himself as the head of the family. Candace, by contrast, often appears unsure, passive, or resigned. Some observers believe she may have been emotionally and mentally manipulated over a long period. Trauma bonding, as experts call it, can keep victims tied to their treatment even in extreme circumstances. In interviews, Dawn has repeatedly deflected blame, casting suspicion on others, or shifting focus to religious interpretations. He's said things like, "God took her," or that, "people in the community are evil." Meanwhile, Candace has remained largely silent. Her minimal public statements lack emotion or detail. She once said, "I just want my baby back," but did not elaborate further. The lack of engagement, no active involvement in searches, no appeals to the public, no media pressure, is strange to many. There's also the matter of their online behavior. Dawn frequently appeared in YouTube live streams, often late at night, sometimes drinking, and occasionally speaking in a cryptic or aggressive tone. He accused neighbors, internet sleuths, and even law enforcement of sabotaging the case. In one clip, he implied that someone could easily dispose of a body in the woods. Whether these comments were meant to intimidate or distract, they only deepened public suspicion. Many point to the fact that, even now, neither parent has offered a detailed, consistent narrative about what happened that day. There are contradictions in timing, in who saw Summer last, and in the order of events. If this were truly a family in crisis, you might expect more unity in their accounts. Instead, what emerges is a fractured set of stories, some of which appear to have changed over time. The theory of domestic abuse does not rely on a smoking gun. It builds on patterns, behavioral inconsistencies, prior criminal behavior, the removal of other children, and emotional detachment. While it doesn't offer clear answers, it explains why no one outside the home saw anything, why no physical evidence has emerged, and why the story, from the beginning, felt off. In cases like this, truth often comes slowly, if at all. But if Summer was hurt in her own home, and those responsible chose silence over justice, then the search must shift, not outward, but inward. The question is not who took her. It's who knew the truth, and why they stayed silent. As the case of Summer Wells unfolded, yet another possibility began to emerge, one that suggests the family may not have acted alone, but may have been assisted, coerced, or manipulated by a third party. This theory doesn't center on accident or abuse within the home alone, nor on a random act of abduction, but rather on the idea that someone close to the family, or familiar with their circumstances, played a role in the disappearance, whether knowingly or as part of a broader scheme. Some internet sleuths and Reddit users have floated the idea that Candace may have handed Summer over to someone, either willingly or under pressure. The motivation for such an act could vary: fear of exposure for another unrelated issue, financial desperation, or even blackmail. One particularly unsettling suggestion is that Summer might have been exchanged to repay a debt. This idea, while speculative, gained traction because of the family's financial struggles and Dawn's criminal history, which including substance use and associating with untrustworthy individuals. In some circles, discussion turned to Dawn's previous interactions with co-workers or acquaintances. There were unconfirmed reports that Dawn had recently fired someone or had disputes with certain individuals in the community. Could one of these people have returned to the property seeking revenge or leverage? Could someone close enough to know the layout of the property, the routine of the household, and the vulnerabilities within have used that knowledge to exploit the family? The concept of the cornbread mafia, a term referring to a loosely connected group involved in organized crime in rural Appalachia, was also introduced into the conversation. While there's no concrete evidence tying such a group to Summer's disappearance, the mere mention of it triggered a wave of theories online. The idea here is that in small, economically challenged areas, underground networks can operate with relative impunity. If a family was in debt, or if someone in that community had something to gain, they might exploit a vulnerable situation. Candace's behavior in some interviews also raised eyebrows. In one televised appearance, she walked away abruptly when the topic of human trafficking was brought up. Viewers debated whether this was a sign of discomfort, fear, or guilt. Was she hiding something, or was she simply overwhelmed? In high-stress situations, such reactions can be misinterpreted, but they also invite scrutiny. Adding to the uncertainty is the fact that the timeline of events that day remains muddy. If there was a planned exchange, it could have occurred in that narrow window when Candace claimed to have gone inside for 2 minutes. A coordinated hand-off wouldn't require a long time, just the right opportunity. And if someone had been watching or communicating with the family prior to that moment, the entire event could have been orchestrated in advance. There's also the troubling possibility that the family may have been manipulated or threatened. In cases involving vulnerable populations, it's not unheard of for people to comply with demands out of fear, whether for their own safety or for that of their children. If a third party had influence over Candace or Dawn, it could explain their inconsistent behavior, their unwillingness to name suspects, and their fixation on only one theory: abduction. Furthermore, some analysts pointed out that Dawn and Candace often seemed more focused on defending themselves than finding their daughter. Could that be because they knew exactly what happened and who was involved, but couldn't say it without endangering others or themselves? Or because they had made a decision they now regret, but cannot reverse? Law enforcement, for their part, has neither confirmed nor denied the possibility of third-party involvement. But the absence of arrests, coupled with the removal of the other children from the home, suggests that investigators believe something was amiss inside the house, or close to it. Yet, without physical evidence, proving such a complex theory becomes difficult. Ultimately, the third-party collusion theory offers an unsettling middle ground between the accident or cover-up narrative and the stranger abduction theory. It acknowledges the possibility of external involvement, but not without implicating those within the family. It suggests that truth might be layered, that the disappearance wasn't spontaneous, nor entirely domestic, but the result of a series of desperate choices made under pressure. As with the other theories, this one raises more questions than it answers. But in the ongoing mystery of Summer Wells, even the most uncomfortable ideas must remain on the table until the truth is known. Among the many theories examined in the disappearance of Summer Wells, one of the earliest, and in some ways, most innocent, was the possibility that Summer simply wandered off. At 5 years old, full of energy and curiosity, it's not inconceivable that she might have walked into the woods surrounding her rural home and lost her way. But as investigators and volunteers searched the thick terrain of Beach Creek, this theory, too, began to unravel. Summer's home was located in a remote, hilly area of Hawkins County, Tennessee. The terrain was rugged, dense woods, steep slopes, hidden ravines, and dangerous wildlife. While the Wells family property stretched over a wide area, it was bordered by forested land filled with undergrowth, fallen trees, and sharp drop-offs. If Summer had wandered off, there were numerous places she could have stumbled, fallen, or become trapped. Proponents of the wandering theory point to the fact that children are naturally curious and prone to exploring. Summer had reportedly gone outside often, and she was comfortable around the property. On the day of her disappearance, Candace said Summer had been planting flowers with her grandmother before going back inside. Candace claimed to have left her alone for just a couple of minutes. Could it be that Summer had exited the house again, slipping away unnoticed into the woods? However, the plausibility of this scenario fades when examined against the facts. First, Summer was barefoot. According to Candace, Summer wasn't wearing shoes when she disappeared. For a child to trek through rocky, thorny terrain, across sticks, stones, and steep inclines, without any shoes, would have likely left cuts or blood, yet no such traces were ever found. Not a single footprint, piece of clothing, or hair was recovered in the area, Despite intensive searching, search and rescue teams, including K-9 units trained in both live scent and cadaver detection, combed over 5,000 acres of land in the days and weeks following Summer's disappearance. They used thermal imaging from helicopters, drones equipped with infrared sensors, and ground-based searchers with GPS tracking. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no clues emerged. Another important factor is time. Search teams were dispatched quickly, and the initial response was extensive. Typically, in missing child cases involving wandering, most children are found within a mile of their home. In Summer's case, even areas within half a mile were covered repeatedly by trained personnel. If she had been nearby, odds are she would have been found within the first 48 hours. The terrain also posed a danger. Beach Creek is home to a number of natural hazards: steep embankments, sinkholes, old wells, and dense thickets. Some worried that Summer may have fallen into one of these hidden dangers. But again, there was no sign of disturbance, no footprints leading up to the edge of a hazard, and no scent trails. Moreover, the family dogs, known to be noisy and territorial, did not alert to Summer's departure. If she had walked away, alone and vulnerable, it's likely the dogs would have followed her or barked. Instead, the scent trail ends near the basement door, reinforcing the idea that she did not venture far on her own, or left by another means. Skeptics of the wandering theory also point to the weather and temperature. It was warm on June 15th, but the woods cool quickly under thick foliage. A barefoot 5-year-old, alone and exposed, would not have survived long without shelter. Yet even after days of searches, including overnight operations, there were no signs of hypothermia, insect activity, or animal interaction, conditions that usually leave evidence. Critics argue that if Summer had wandered off, it would be among the easiest scenarios to resolve. Cases of children getting lost near home are tragic but typically solvable. They leave trails, clues, sounds. None of those emerged here. The forest did not give up any secrets, ultimately. While the wandering theory is less sinister than others, it remains one of the least supported by physical evidence. It relies on the assumption that a child could vanish into the wilderness and leave absolutely no trace behind. And in the face of coordinated, multi-agency search efforts, that seems increasingly unlikely. That's not to say it's impossible. Children have gone missing in similar environments and remained hidden for days, but they are almost always found eventually, either alive or with evidence of their fate. In Summer's case, the silence of the forest is deafening. No rustled leaves, no displaced branches, no sign of struggle or shelter. For many, this theory served as a hopeful explanation in the early days. Perhaps she was alive, maybe hiding, maybe sleeping under a tree. But as time wore on and the land yielded nothing, hope gave way to doubt. If Summer had walked into the woods, she left no footprints behind, and so, even the gentlest theory, the idea that Summer simply wandered off, cannot explain the utter void that remains. It is a theory built on innocence, undone by absence. As the years drag on with no resolution in the disappearance of Summer Wells, another theory, one far more unsettling, has taken root in the minds of many, that the failure to solve this case is not merely due to a lack of evidence or the complexity of the terrain, but because of a deliberate cover-up or severe mishandling by authorities. This theory doesn't point fingers solely at the family. Instead, it turns its gaze toward those responsible for solving the case and asks, what if they failed us? From the beginning, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took lead in the case. While their initial response appeared swift and thorough, involving search teams, K-9 units, helicopters, and community engagement, it didn't take long for critics to question the direction and effectiveness of the investigation. The first public cracks emerged not through press conferences, but through silence. For months, TBI released very little information. Key details were withheld. Tips were said to be under review, without follow-up. No persons of interest were named, and no charges were filed. To many observers, this silence became suspicious. Online forums like Reddit began dissecting every press release and media appearance. Users noted the absence of clear suspects, the lack of updated search warrants, and the minimal interaction with the public. When the agency finally did release information, it was often vague and non-committal. Was this a reflection of cautious professionalism, or a sign that they had hit a wall, or worse, knew more than they let on? One particularly damning accusation is that someone inside the system may be protecting a suspect, or even involved themselves. While there is no concrete proof of such claims, conspiracy theorists point to several inconsistencies. For instance, Don Wells had previous run-ins with law enforcement, including domestic violence and DUI arrests, yet he was never formally named as a suspect. Was he simply ruled out or protected? Supporters of this theory also bring up TBI's warning to the public about online speculation. The agency stated that social media was interfering with the investigation and urged people to stop spreading rumors. While this may be standard practice to avoid misinformation, critics saw it differently. Why attempt to silence independent voices unless they were hitting too close to the truth? Another troubling aspect is the removal of Summer's brothers from the family home. Authorities cited general concerns for their well-being, but no official charges of abuse or neglect were filed against Candace or Dawn. If the home was unsafe enough to warrant removing the children, why wasn't stronger action taken? Were officials trying to avoid a deeper scandal, or were they simply constrained by lack of evidence? Then there's the issue of timing. Multiple Reddit users pointed out that it took days for investigators to fully secure and process the Wells property. By then, any potential forensic evidence could have been lost. Some believe the property should have been treated as a crime scene immediately, not simply a search zone. This delay, whether due to oversight or intention, could have compromised the entire case. Local politics have also been drawn into the mix. Some theorists claim that the Wells family had connections, however distant, to people in local law enforcement. Others suggest that local officials were under pressure to avoid scandal or negative publicity. In small towns, where everyone knows each other, it's not hard to imagine how influence, fear, or even favoritism could play a role. Furthermore, the initial 911 call made by Candace has never been publicly released. Law enforcement claims it is being withheld due to the ongoing nature of the investigation. Yet in other missing child cases, 911 audio is often made available to the public. Why not here? What does that call contain that the public must not hear? Was it vague, contradictory, or even incriminating? Skeptics also highlight a lack of transparency around the search efforts. While over 5,000 acres were reportedly searched, little information has been shared about where and how those searches were conducted. Some claim areas were searched multiple times unnecessarily, while others, like abandoned structures and known criminal hangouts, were ignored entirely. The cornbread mafia theory, which previously focused on rural crime syndicates, has also been folded into this narrative. Some believe that if Summer's disappearance was connected to such a group, local law enforcement may have been too scared, or too compromised, to pursue that angle. The deeper the theory goes, the more it suggests not just incompetence, but fear and complicity. Of course, it's important to note that official cover-ups are rare and hard to sustain without leaks. But this case, by its very nature, invites speculation. 4 years with no answers. A family with a troubled past. Conflicting timelines. An investigative body that urges silence while offering no resolution. It's no wonder that people begin to suspect the worst. At its core, this theory is fueled not just by mistrust, but by desperation. When institutions fail to provide clarity, the public fills in the gaps. Whether through logical deduction or wild speculation, the human mind seeks closure. And in the case of Summer Wells, closure remains painfully out of reach. Until evidence emerges that can confirm or deny these suspicions. The theory of institutional failure and possible cover-up will remain a shadow over the entire investigation. It may not be the most likely scenario, but in a case where every other path seems to lead nowhere, even the unthinkable must be considered. The disappearance of Summer Wells not only shocked a small Tennessee community, it ignited a digital wildfire. As days turned into weeks with no answers, the online world responded in two very different ways, with cold logic and with raw emotion. Reddit and Facebook became the central stages for this divide, each offering a unique window into how people process the unknown. On Reddit, users approached the case like a puzzle. They built timelines, dissected interviews, analyzed video footage, and cross-referenced public records. Entire threads were dedicated to tracking inconsistencies in Candace and Dawn's stories. Users overlaid maps of the Wells property with timestamps, debated the placement of the milk jugs in the TikTok video, and questioned the behavior of the family dogs. The goal was clear: to find the truth through logic and pattern recognition. Many users insisted on remaining impartial, often reminding others, "We don't know what happened. Stick to the facts." This digital detective mindset brought value, archiving data, surfacing overlooked details, and holding media accountable for sloppy reporting. Reddit became a kind of citizen-led investigation, fueled not by emotion but by curiosity and a desire for justice. In some ways, the platform acted as a supplement to law enforcement, providing leads, timelines, and psychological insight. But this logic-driven culture had a dark side. The desire to find truth sometimes crossed into obsession. When new interviews or YouTube videos surfaced, Redditors dissected them within hours, sometimes over-interpreting facial expressions or background noises. A mother's blink or a father's fumble could spark hundreds of comments. In the absence of real evidence, perception became its own kind of proof. Assumptions calcified into facts, and innocent mistakes were read as signs of guilt. Meanwhile, posts often came from a place of outrage, fear, or grief, and it showed. Candace and Dawn were regularly called monsters, addicts, and killers. Memes mocked their interviews. Commenters declared them guilty with phrases like, "They know what happened," or, "I wouldn't leave my child alone for 2 minutes." The anger was immediate, and often deeply personal. These spaces were less about building a case and more about delivering judgment. Some believed they were standing up for Summer, giving voice to a child who had none. Others simply wanted someone to blame. In this environment, empathy for the parents was rare. Every contradiction became a lie. Every public appearance became a performance. Every silence was interpreted as guilt. This mob mentality also led to online sleuthing that bordered on harassment. Personal information about the Wells family, including addresses, criminal records, and social connections, was widely shared. YouTube channels were created solely to track and expose the family's every move. People drove by the house, filmed the property, and confronted relatives. At one point, law enforcement had to ask the public to stop interfering. Psychologists call this response the scapegoat reflex. In high-profile missing child cases, the public often needs someone to direct their pain toward. It's a coping mechanism. If we can point to a villain, the chaos feels more manageable. In the Summer Wells case, this reflex collided with social media's speed and scale, turning theory into certainty and suspicion into harassment. But this brings us to a deeper ethical question. What if we're wrong? In a world of digital justice, accusations can spread faster than truth. Families have been doxxed, strangers labeled suspects, lives ruined, without a single charge ever filed. The Summer Wells case shows just how fast the internet can become a courtroom. But in this courtroom, there are no judges, only opinions. No due process, only likes and shares. And the damage can be permanent. Yes, some online researchers have helped uncover truths in cold cases. Reddit played a key role in the identification of the Golden State Killer, for example. But the line between investigation and defamation is thin. What begins as curiosity can turn into cruelty. A community looking for answers can become a tribunal that silences other possibilities. Online behavior also influences real-world investigations. Law enforcement agencies are now required to address public narratives, even when they are unfounded. In the case of Summer Wells, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released multiple statements asking the public not to spread rumors. They warned that social media speculation was harming the case by flooding tip lines with misinformation. This raises another critical point: the ethics of true crime communities. Are we helping or hurting? Are we honoring the missing, or building entertainment out of their pain? When people create TikToks about Summer's case using dramatic music and quick cuts, is that awareness or exploitation? The answer likely lies in intent. Communities that focus on facts, elevate credible information, and avoid personal attacks can be powerful allies to justice. But those that jump to conclusions, chase clout, or turn grief into gossip contribute nothing but noise. Still, the urge to solve the mystery is deeply human. Summer Wells represents more than one lost girl. She has become a symbol of every child who disappeared without answers. And in that symbolic weight, people project their fears, hopes, and frustrations. So we must ask, when a case is still open, when there is no arrest, no body, no final report, do we have the right to declare guilt? The internet gave Summer's story a voice that local media alone never could. But in amplifying her name, we must also carry responsibility, not just to speak, but to listen. Not just to analyze, but to understand. And not just to blame, but to seek justice with care. Because if we turn grief into vengeance, we risk becoming part of the tragedy ourselves. It has now been over 4 years since Summer Wells vanished from her home in Beech Creek, Tennessee. 4 years of headlines, searches, interviews, and speculation. 4 years of questions without answers. What remains most disturbing is not just that Summer is still missing, but that not a single piece of confirmed evidence has emerged. No suspect has been charged. No remains have been found. And of the more than 6,500 tips received by law enforcement, none has led to a breakthrough. How does a 5-year-old child disappear in broad daylight from her own home without a trace? This question haunts not only those who followed the case, but also those closest to Summer. It is the mystery at the heart of the investigation, a void where logic and probability collapse. Children don't vanish into thin air. There is always a trail, a sign, a moment. But in Summer's case, each lead seems to unravel. Each theory, when examined closely, raises more doubts than confidence. It's as if a fog surrounds the truth, thick, deliberate, and impenetrable. Many believe the answer lies close to home. That someone, somewhere, knows what happened and has chosen silence. Whether out of fear, guilt, loyalty, or trauma, this silence has now become its own form of obstruction. It is a wall that neither public outrage nor private investigation has yet been able to breach. We must ask, why? Why, after all this time, has no one stepped forward? Why has no piece of evidence, no shoe, no strand of hair, no credible sighting emerged? Is it possible that the truth was buried, both literally and metaphorically, before the first search ever began? Law enforcement has continued to treat the case as active. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has emphasized that all theories remain on the table. But their public statements have become increasingly cautious. At times, they've seemed almost resigned, acknowledging the lack of movement while still urging the public to remain hopeful. Hope is hard to sustain after 4 years, and yet, hope is also the only thing that keeps a case like this alive. Hope fuels posters, billboards, TikToks, YouTube videos, Reddit threads, and candlelight vigils. Hope is what prompts a stranger in another state to look twice at a child in a grocery store. Hope is what reminds us that justice, even delayed, is still justice. But hope must be paired with action. We cannot let Summer become just another cold case, just another face on a missing persons list. We must keep her story alive, not as a form of entertainment, but as a plea for truth. So we ask you, the reader, the viewer, the witness to this narrative, share her photo. Tell her story. Keep her name in the light. If you've seen something, say something. If you live near Beech Creek and remember anything unusual from June 15, 2021, no matter how small, report it. If you've heard whispers or seen strange behavior from someone you know, trust your instincts. The smallest tip could be the thread that unravels a knot of silence. And to those who have already shared information, thank you. Your courage matters. Every phone call, Every message, every ounce of attention keeps the door open. You are the reason Summer hasn't been forgotten. We also want to thank the countless volunteers who searched the woods, the creators who responsibly covered this story, the journalists who asked the hard questions, and the strangers online who treated Summer with compassion rather than judgment. You are the counterweight to a world that too often moves on. We may not have the answers yet, but we can still choose how we respond. With care, with persistence, with belief that someone, somewhere, knows something, and that one day, the truth will emerge. Until then, we will not stop asking, what happened to Summer Wells? She deserves to be found. She deserves justice. She deserves to come home, or at the very least, for her story to be told with honesty, dignity, and purpose. Let's not allow this silence to become the final chapter. Let's keep looking. Let's keep the light on.